and on the 11th hour, we're able to at least temporarily avert this tariff threat. It all starts off in the morning, and I'm told there was a pitch to Donald Trump that included really what we see as the meat and potatoes of this response, the majority of that $1.3 billion border plan. And this was the tricky part, that there really wasn't much the government could do until they heard back from Donald Trump at 3 o'clock.
So tell us how this tariff threat waged by Donald Trump was stopped, at least temporarily, during these two phone calls with Prime Minister Trudeau yesterday.
Yeah, it's crazy. After not talking since the inauguration, 2 phone calls in a day, and on the 11th hour, we're able to at least temporarily avert this tariff threat. It all starts off in the morning, and I'm told there was a pitch to Donald Trump that included really what we see as the meat and potatoes of this response, the majority of that $1.3 billion border plan, and then the wait. And this was the tricky part, that there really wasn't much the government could do until they heard back from Donald Trump at 3 o'clock. And where we see perhaps some of the concessions, you might call them, or the diplomacy is perhaps a better word for it, is in the additions to this that you can clearly see are not typical verbiage of the Canadian government. The creation of a fentanyl czar, for example, that's not the vocabulary of the Canadian government. It is the vocabulary of the U.S. administration, though. Tom Homan, their border czar, was a position that Donald Trump created for his administration. It'll be interesting to see how that position is created here in Canada. Will it operate inside or outside a ministry? Typically, the borders are under the public safety minister. What sort of power will that fentanyl czar have? How will they have staff or operate? There are a lot of questions about that because that is something that is very, very new. I don't think that was on anyone's bingo card when it came to averting these tariffs. There are other aspects of this, like the border plan, like the 10,000 frontline officers on the border, that aren't necessarily very new, especially when you consider the fact that there are already 8,500 officers on the front lines at the Canadian borders here. So there were some concessions that came in, or some, negotiating that happened on that final call to get us to that point. But you pointed it out, the end of Donald Trump's Truth Social post yesterday, where he celebrates victory and he talks about Canada taking firm action on drugs, also talks about spending the next 30 days trying to find an economic deal. And that's where there are a lot of questions that remain, because if you look at the executive order that he signed, the official document, it only talks about the border. It only talks about tariffs, about drugs and migrant crossings being the thing that will reinstitute tariffs. When he says there needs to be an economic deal, that means the threat is still hanging over us, and it's very unclear what exactly that deal needs to answer.
Yes.